Hey, what's up guys? JB here. We're back again today with more Final Fantasy VIII. Today we're going to be taking a look at Squall, who has joined us here in War of the Visions Global this week. I know that this guy has been a fan favorite, being the protagonist of his game, and certainly one of my favorites as well. He definitely gave up those edgy sort of emo vibes that really sort of resonated with me back in the day as a teenager. Word on the street, though, is that a lot of people have been underwhelmed, especially over in JP, where they did do extensive testing with him. But now that he's here in Global, why don't we just take a look at his kit and let's decide for ourselves and see what he can do. So Squall has joined War of the Visions as a 100 cost lightning unit. He's part of that knight weapon group. He has base 3-1 movement, and he can wear hats and cloth. Starting with the TMR, it's another very, very good one. This is a haste TMR. Bradley's, of course, has been used all over the place in the meta, and this one you can use in a similar manner. The key difference with this one is that it does have a party buff component tied into it, giving that defense debuff resistance to your ally. That effect alone, I think, is pretty valuable. You can think about all the units out there in the meta that do have nice defense breaks. Units like King Bradley, Sephiroth, even Edward Elric with his Limit Burst has that 45 defense break. I do think that the more interesting thing here is for autoplay, though, where this haste TMR having a party buff component tied into it, that's something that now you can use to manipulate your movement, have you move sideways into your teammate to give them that buff and get haste at the same time. So just sort of gives you, another option to use for initial team setups. Looking at the stats here next, unlike Renoa's, Squall is actually very, very strong statistically. Of course, we know that stats really are never the whole story, but it's certainly a great start here for Squall. Very strong HP here, approaching tank-like levels, and especially that base HP is within the top 10 for War of the Visions. Really nice attack value here on top of that, so he's going to be scaling very, very well when it comes to either HP or attack-based boosts. Aside from that, though, he does come in closer down to the average a bit, in terms of some of these other stats. Pretty good agility, though. The accuracy, although it does look very strong here in that base total, keep in mind that it is including one of his passives, which gives him 25 accuracy. I don't think that that's one that people will often be using. It's not a very strong passive overall, so, just something to keep in mind in terms of that AC total. Overall, though, these stats are very, very good. He's not really going to be a liability for you in that department whatsoever. Moving down now into the defensive stats, we're just going to have a random 2 defense here along with 0 spirit. His resistances, on the other hand, are very strong, particularly in that slash and strike departments at 20% respectively, which is really going to encompass the majority of the units which have been released over the past 6 to 7 months. He is getting a positive 10 to missile and 5 to magic as well. Just a single weakness here, and it is to that pierce damage coming in at that minus 10 value. Again, that's something that has been a trend here over the recent months. On the ailment front, he is going to be 50% to blind and then 50% to stun, and then he's getting that 10% to berserk. Of course, ailments, they're always going to be matchup specific depending on the units that are out there, but at least in terms of blind and stun, I wouldn't say they're really covering any of the major concerns out there in the meta, at least right now. If Fire Evade were maybe to make more of a push here in the coming months, maybe that blind resist, though, could be pretty useful. For his mastery ability, he is getting 20% reaction block. With the upgrades that counters have been getting, over the recent months, you always like to see that one. He is adding in 10 area resist here as well, which is another feather in his cap defensively. When you do awaken him all the way up to level 140, he's going to be getting a reduction in his AP cost by 20%. He's getting that 15 lightning attack modifier, and then an upgrade to his job 12 ability that we'll look at here in a few moments. For the passive abilities, I think an always on is going to be his Quetzalcoatl's Fury. He's going to be picking up a bit of defense there, another 15 area resist, which is going to get him up to 25%, and then that 40% slash res penetration. Personally, I would opt to pair that one with Trick Lancer Lore for the defense penetration, and that's also going to boost up his crit rate there on top of it. For a counter ability, he is getting a very strong one here. It's called Auto Guard. It does have a 70% chance to proc against either slash or strike damage, and it will reduce the incoming damage of those attacks by a whopping 40%. So he really has the ability there to shut down certain units that aren't carrying any of their own reaction block innately. Moving into the main kit here now, and we're going to start with the buffs. His self buff is going to get him 25% slash and strike resistance, and it's going to add in an all-new barrier mechanic for the game. In JP, they were calling this one the honeycomb barrier. Here in Global, it has been translated as the force barrier. And basically how this one works is it's going to be a damage reduction that increases the farther that you are away from your opponent. And here on this graphic, you can see that I've shown exactly how this effect works. And starting at a range of 4, it's going to give you a 10% reduction against any damage type, and gradually getting up as high as 40% reduction when you do get to a range of 7 or more. Now we will be getting a new Trials of Reckoning accessory, which does actually work in a very similar way here for Squall. It's a model of the Ragnarok ship from the game, which is very, very cool. But what it does is it's going to add a secondary barrier effect, which does stack with his own force barrier. This one, though, it's only going to be effective against physical damage, and it will start at a range of 3. And again, those effects, they do stack, so against physical damage, you can see the total mitigation numbers there at the bottom, ranging all the way up to a whopping 70% at a range of 7 or higher. So very, very strong, I think, especially against missile units. So I did want to sort of demonstrate and show those numbers there because it is an all-new mechanic for the game, and I do actually think it's a pretty cool one. I can see this being, particularly interesting, in auto play, because this is going to have the side effect of actually drawing the enemies into Squall and actually sort of lining them up for an AoE, because the AI will actually always be looking to do its maximum damage, and in that regard, they're going to need to move as close to Squall as they possibly can. Now, his second buff here, I'm not as hyped about this one. This one's his party buff. He's going to pass 20 defense and 25 slash attack onto his allies, and then he'll add protect along with a 20 AP restore onto himself. This one is fine enough. I think I like the effects that are going on to himself, but certainly from, what you're actually passing on to the team, it's really not all that compelling. I think it's especially underwhelming when you compare it to Bridal Elia's buff, where she's giving that 30 area resistance, the innate re-raise dispel. It's just crazy. And then you kind of look at the effects here and it's like, that's it. So, honestly, I think if you had room for only 2 buffs on a map, you might even consider turning this one off. Use his haste TMR instead. If you do have room for maybe 3, maybe you can work this one in there. Looking at the attack skills here next, his low AP finisher skill is going to be a range 4, range height of 1, has 2 effects on it. If he does get a killing blow on this one, it's going to restore 15 AP back into his pool. And then if he does get a crit on that one, it's going to restore another 10 AP on top of that, so potentially up to 25 AP coming back on this skill at a 15 cost, so he's going to be able to net 10 AP there in that scenario. I do actually like this one in terms of how the AI generally uses this type of skill. They only are coming up generally in 2 situations. One, if you don't have enough AP to use anything else, and then 2, of course, if you are going for that KO on the opponent. So either way, that AP sustain is going to be good for that situation. Now, skill number 2 is his Renzo Kukin. This one does have another new mechanic here for the game. This one is going to be a chain damage type Imperil, and essentially how this one works at a high level, normally there is an escalating chain modifier that, goes on to the damage calculation at the very end. So, just sort of giving an example here, we'll say slash damage. For each subsequent slash hits, that goes on to an opponent, your damage, is going to increase by 20%. And what this new chain modifier does is it essentially increases the power of that chain modifier by 50%, meaning that final chain increase goes from a 20% per hit up to a 30% per hit. So I think in terms of PvP, the effects are generally going to be, somewhat minor. We don't generally see long typed chains going on in PvP battles, but I think for PvE, this could be pretty impactful, especially in something like a guild raid where you're getting off, quite a few hits. This attack itself is also a 2-hit attack, so it will increase the damage even on this attack here by a relatively small amount on the second hit. Now, the third attack here is the one that does get upgraded when you take him up to level 140. This one has a 38% slash imperil that's coming in prior to the damage. Does get up to a range of 5 there on the diamond AoE. This one's coming in with a medium 165% modifier. We do have 2 debuff effects here coming in post damage. That's going to be a 50 healing power reduction, as well as a defense penetration reduction of 30. So if you have built up a bunch of defense on Squall or his teammates, this one is going to increase their survivability against physical damage dealers. Squall does actually have a new weapon that has come in with his event as well, which does increase his defense value when he crits, so does give a little bit more value here to this debuff for him. His fourth attack is going to be Blasting Zone. We have a straight line AoE here up to a range of 4 with a range height of 1. Prior to the damage, this will dispel the Protect status, as well as increase his own defense penetration by 50 just for this particular skill. This one does have a large 200% modifier, and it is a guaranteed hit for Squall. So always nice to have that option for a 100% hit. He's not necessarily going to be forced into building up a bunch of accuracy and, have to cover for that innate weakness. The straight line pattern here on this one, though, does make it a bit hard to use, especially at just a range height of 1. And he does only have 3 uses of that skill, so definitely something to keep in mind, in terms of your team building. Now, finally, we do have the limit burst here, Lionhearts. This one is, again, a range of 4 with a range height of 1. Just a single effect here on the LB, which I'd say is very disappointing. He'll get a 10% AP auto restore after he hits. This attack is also a 4-hit chain for Squall, so that in itself actually is pretty notable. If Squall happened to get out, that chain in peril that we were just talking about, the damage on this one, could actually be amped up by, a little bit. This is also the first 4-hit chain that is coming in for the lightning element. They were the only element in the game that didn't have one to date, so certainly a nice boost for the guild raid fans out there as well. So there is a new vision card that's come in with Squall. It's a mono element card, which we actually haven't seen in the game for quite a while. There is some overlap here, though, with the Esther card that we do have here in Global. If you are all in Squall and the lightning element, I would say, it's still definitely a good pickup. Although there is some overlap there, it does actually bring in some strike resistance, on top of that unit resistance, which, at least in terms of the current meta, is very, very valuable. In terms of Squall's Knight weapon group, unfortunately, there really hasn't been a ton of development for it thus far. There's definitely some quality units in there, definitely some quality cards as well. You have Wing Stern in there, you have Lightning, who hopefully will be getting her upgrade sometime soon. Of course, we have King Bradley in there, who's probably the best unit of the bunch. Just not all that many cards, thus far, although there's a couple of good ones. On top of that, though, we are missing Melnia's card there, which we would have expected to have, by Squall's release in the game. And at least in terms of the roadmap, which Gumi put out a few days ago, Melnia's card and Melnia herself are nowhere to be seen on that, so we have no idea when she's coming, but at least based on that information, it would seem that it's going to be at least November or beyond at this point. I would say that's pretty unfortunate because I do believe that card is the best one for the Knight group that has been issued thus far. It really starts to enable team building, bringing that unit resistance and agility combo for the group. So I would say, at least for now, that really does push Squall towards the mono element team build direction, at least until we get that card and maybe some more pieces for this group. I will say, though, that people have successfully mixed in King Bradley into Fisk groups in the past, utilizing that Perrine card, Inherited Wills, along with that Full Metal Alchemist card, so that certainly could be an option as well. When we do get that Melnia card, I'm also very intrigued by the combination of Knight and Mace. Alright guys, so on to the mock builds here next. And just in regards to that point of weapon group options that we were talking about, I'm going to be going for a mono element build here today. And we're going to actually be going for an anti-Alaya lightning team here. So we're going to be putting an emphasis on strike resistance, unit resistance, and even a bit of defense. Remember that Squall's large AoE there does reduce enemy defense pen by 30%, so that's going to give a bit more value there to your defense. So for equipment here, we are using Squall's new weapon. I do actually really like the critical version for him, especially in this particular build here, as I have brought in some crit damage modifiers. For the armor, I am going to be using the survival vest. I feel like a broken record at this point, but it really is the best option out there against Alaya and many other units. And then I'm going to be bringing in his own TMR for that haste effect. Unfortunately, no agility base stats on that one, but we are going to throw some on that in the Truststone build. For an Esper, I do really like Master Curl for him. It's a 20 agility Esper. It's got that lightning attack, slash attack, strike resistance, even some crit rate on there. So it's going to be a great choice all around for this build. For the vision card, I am going to be using Esther's vision card. It's an amazing choice for Squall that really amps up his damage potential there with the slash res penetration. And it's something that we have here in Global that JP doesn't, so maybe it could be something that can, amp up his potential there just a bit more. I'm going to be pairing that with the Salir card for the agility and the Final Fantasy XIII lightning card there for the area resistance. In the sub slots, I'm going to be using Squall's card to double up on the unit resistance and then add in a little bit of strike res as well. And then I'm going going to be bringing in those 2 fist cards that we were just talking about. Of course, the Knight group is on them as well. That's going to give us some HP and reaction block, some crit damage, and attack percentage. Very nice cards there all around for this team. Now moving down now into the Trust Stones, I'm going to be going with my standard HP and agility sets. Defensively, at least, it's going to be very similar to what we just did with Renoa, getting a bit of lightning and strike resistance in there. On the offensive side, I am going to be emphasizing the crit potential there for Squall. We've got a big crit rate base stat on the Lionheart as well as a crit rate passive. So here in the stones, I am going to be adding in some dexterity as well as a crit damage modifier. Along with that, I'm going to go with some other standard offensive passives here like attack, defense pen, acquired AP, and etc. So looking at the stats here, you can see the HP really popping off the page. Keep in mind, no reincarnations here. So if you were to take him all the way, he's going to be approaching nearly 15,000 HP in this build. We do have a bit of a defensive emphasis here, so he's going to be coming with 52% strike resistance here in the builds. Keep in mind, he does have access to that self buff. He can add another 25% on top. And then adding to that, we do have a pretty balanced setup in terms of the unit and area resistance at 41% and 45% respectively. Of course, that's not going to be factoring in his force barrier or protect effects at all. Those are going to be layered in on top of this, and it's going to make him very, very tanky, especially at range. And with the emphasis on crit and dexterity here on the build, his crit rate is going to be very, very high, and that's going to help out his damage there in turn. So that is the Lightning Element anti-Alaya build. Of course, it couldn't be complete without Alaya herself, so she is in there as well. As always, if you want to see the finer details of the build, I will go ahead and pop a link to it in the description below. So what is my verdict today on Squall? Starting with the positives, it's all going to start with that force barrier effect. That's a barrier that is currently undispellable in the game. And with it increasing the mitigation, the further you are away from your opponents, it does set him up really well, especially against long-range missile units. While at the same time manipulating the AI to be drawn in closer to him so that they can be set up for large AoE damage. This is a unit that does have pretty good debuff potential there on top of it, with the slash and chain imperils, the healing down, and the defense pen debuff. This is also a unit that you're really not going to have to worry about at all for his AP, having various sources not only within his kit, but also within his weapon to help him out in that regard. Lastly, Squall is really going to excel in enhancing the chains of your party, not only bringing a 2-hit attack, but also being the first unit within the Lightning Element to bring in a 4-hit chain attack, setting him up perfectly for guild raids in the future. On the more negative side though, Squall is really middle of the road in terms of his accuracy, and although he does have some passives that can help him out there if you're desperate, it really does downgrade your damage potential if you are to pull those ones in. Thankfully, he does have a guaranteed hit attack in his kit that you can utilize when you do need it. Squall is also missing any and all option to augment his mobility, whether it be an additional jump or movement. Although you may not always want to have those equipped, at least having the option does make for a much more flexible and usable unit. In terms of team gameplay, this is a unit that really doesn't offer much of anything to the team in terms of party buffs, with his main party buff only offering a bit of defense and slash attack, which generally aren't all that impactful of effects. Along those same lines, Squall is missing some modern utility that is much needed in the game today. Things like a general dispel, courage or re-raise removal, or even an AoE barrier break. Although he does have access to a single unit barrier break within his Trick Lancer sub. At the end of the day, I think Squall is a fine enough bruiser with some pretty nice damage potential in the right circumstances. Despite that though, I do stand by my initial impressions of this unit that we are still lacking, some of the options to really fully utilize his full potential. Will that be the new Asterius that is coming out this week in Japan? Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Outside of that, well, I think you can certainly find some viable use cases for him in the game currently, especially within a mono-element team. I just really don't find him all that compelling of an overall package, especially in light of some of the options that have come out in recent months, and even more so when you put him up against a unit that has just come out within his own elements. It does leave Squall's kit just feeling a bit underwhelming in comparison. So that is it, guys. That's going to conclude my review today for Squall. I was super hyped for this guy, so I do have to say it is a bit disappointing that he's not going to be up there on the top shelf next to Sephiroth or Bradley or Alaya. At the end of the day though, pull for who you like, pull for who you want to play. This is a game after all, so you should have some fun with it. Sadly, I think that Gumi does understand that, and maybe that is what happened here in Squall's case. Let me know what you guys think about Squall. Are you seeing something that I missed? Are you excited about the new Astrius unit, and will Squall become a powerhouse alongside him? Let's hear about all of that in the comments down below. While you're down there, if you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.